Coming to polysynaptic reflexes or withdrawal reflexes, when more than one synapse is involved in the reflex pathway, it is called as polysynaptic reflex. The reflex path branches in a complex fashion. Because of the difference in the number of synapses, the synaptic delay varies. The activity in the branches with the fewer synapses reaches the motor neuron first, followed by the activity in the longer pathways. This will lead to prolonged response in motor pathways. Some of the branched pathways turn back on themselves, permitting activity to reverberate until it becomes unable to cause prolonged transsynaptic response. Such circuits are called as reverberating circuits. These are common in brain and spinal cord. For example, withdrawal reflex. Withdrawal reflex, it is a typical polysynaptic reflex. Stimulus here occurs in response to noxious and usually painful stimulation of the skin subcutaneous tissue of the muscle, and the response seen is contraction of the flexor and inhibition of extensor. The effect is the part stimulated is flexed and withdrawn from the stimulus, that is, you see flexor response, and if stimulus is still stronger, the response includes flexion and withdrawal of that limb and extension of the opposite limb, and this is called as cross extensor response mechanism. If the strength of the stimulus is more, the excitatory impulse spreads up and down in the spinal cord to more and more motor units, and this phenomena is called as irradiation of the stimulus, and the increase in the total motor units is called as recruitment of motor units. Importance is it's a protective reflex, and the flexion of the stimulated limbs get away from the source of irritation, and the extension of the other limb supports the body. The pattern presumed by all the four limbs puts the animal in a position to run away from the offending stimulus. So the characteristics features of withdrawal reflex. Withdrawal reflexes are prepotent, that is, they prevent the spinal pathways from any other reflex activity taking place at that moment. A weak stimulus can cause quick flexion movement, whereas a strong stimulus causes prolonged flexion and sometimes a series of flexion movements. The prolonged response is due to the prolonged repeated firing of motor neurons. The repeated firing is called as after discharge, which is due to the continued bombardment of the motor neurons by impulses arriving by complicated and circuitous polysynaptic, that is, reverberating circuits. So this is the diagram of reverberating circuits because of the involvement of the mini synapses, which is supposed to carry impulses to the motor neuron, and sometimes some of the synaptic activity goes back to the previous neurons, and they causes the reverberating circuits, and which is going to lead to the after discharge, which leads to the prolonged effect to the motor neuron, which is called as after discharge. Local sign, it refers to the ability of reflex to confine the withdrawal exactly to the portion of the body affected by noxious stimulus. For example, if the medial surface of the limb is stimulated, the response will include some abduction with flexion, whereas stimulation of the lateral surface will produce some adduction with flexion. This dependence of exact response to the location of the stimulus is called as local sign.